Thanks for coming. My name is Dan Ficker, and I guess we'll just jump into that first. About me, we get the boring part out of the way. My name is Dan Ficker. My Twitter handle is Delirious Guy, and so I think I turned off all the things that won't buzz me if you tweet me right now, but feel free to do so anyway. And there's my blog, and I work at a company in Minneapolis, Minnesota called August Ash, and I guess I wore the t-shirt today too. And we do design, development, and marketing for lots of small, medium-sized businesses in the Twin Cities, maybe a couple big ones. The Twin Cities in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. That was a photo of me who took it at a burger place in Chicago here like 5 or 6 years ago, so I thought that was fitting because we're in Chicago. So. Yeah, first of all, I will just give you kind of a quick overview of what we're going to cover. In the years and years, or a number of years that I've made websites built websites and managed websites for August Ash, plenty of times kind of run into issues with the smoothness or ability to launch a website, and so we're going to try to talk about through some of those things. One main part of that is kind of switching DNS, and we're going to talk about what DNS is and kind of how it works, and hopefully you can better understand it and then therefore not be so confused next time DNS comes up as an issue. Also going to talk about a couple things like maybe some just basic suggestions for hosting and what to look for there and what to talk about with if you're not a developer, the developers that are building the website, or sometimes I know developers are just like, oh, I just have somebody else I give the files and database to the DevOps people and they just make the website, launch the website. And hopefully if you're a developer that usually does that, we can give you a couple little things to keep in mind for launching it yourself. Yeah, and then we're going to also just talk about really preparing to move the website as much as possible to make sure that that the website's transition goes as smoothly as possible. So throughout the presentation, I'm going to make a little list of kind of the information that we need to actually move the website. The main information really has to do with the domain name of the website. In this case, we're actually going to mention midcamp.org because that's the camp we're at here. And so we're going to kind of pretend like if we're going to make a new website for midcamp.org, how are we going to get it onto the internet? And so this is kind of the information we need: the registrar and the owner, the DNS servers, who manages the DNS so that we can actually change DNS records, and then also get a hosting provider. So we're going to talk through that. First of all, we're going to talk about what DNS is. And basically, yeah, this is it's a little bit technical, but we're going to try to go through it. There are basic systems. This is one part that you're really familiar with. This is your computer or your internet device, your phone or Xbox or something like that. And basically, that computer device talks to a router. It could be a wireless router, a wired router, something in your home that says, here's how to get to the internet. And from that wire router also talks to other router systems to get the information back and forth to your device. And there's even further than that, those routers talk to large internet backbones, huge servers that manage thousands and thousands of requests every second. And the final thing we're going to talk about is what we call the name servers, and that's where DNS is looked up. So when you have a website, say midcamp.org, it actually, the name server actually says midcamp.org means that the server is over in this location. And so we're going to talk about that. First of all, we'll talk a little bit about just visualizing how that request comes in. So your computer says, I want to go to midcamp.org, and I don't know where to go to get that. And so the first thing it does is basically send a request to the router saying, hey, where do I get midcamp.org? and then the router doesn't really know, so at least in the hypothetical case, it doesn't really know, so it asks the next router down the line. And those routers kind of keep asking each other and say, I don't really know at all. In the end, they find their way to the name server, which is the kind of the authority on where the DNS record is. And so then it actually gets that information, and then it sends it back to the router that just asked it, and says, here's the answer. And then that information sooner or later gets back all the way to you. On the way, those internet backbones, internet routers, and maybe even your home router, some do DNS or some don't, but those routers can keep a copy of that information of here's where midcamp.org is. So yeah, when I typed in midcamp.org, it actually said, hey, this IP address is where you can find midcamp.org. And then it also gave me a time to live, or TTL, and that is an information about, says this record of IP address is valid for the next, in the example case, 3,600 seconds, which is an hour. But it could be any amount of time, 200 seconds, 5 seconds, 86,400 seconds is a day. So, and the nice thing about that is that basically the next time someone or your computer asks, how do I get to midcamp.org, it just asks its router, and it doesn't have to go all the way to the name server. There's some router that says, oh, I know the answer to that, and I have a valid record that says midcamp.org is this IP address. So the second time or third time or fourth time that it's looked up, it will hopefully be a faster response to look up where midcamp.org is. And then, of course, after it does all that lookup, then it actually sends a request to that IP address saying, hey, I want the web page for midcamp.org. And then that server actually gives the whole web page. And that's where Drupal or other web systems come in to actually give you your content. But the main thing here, is this, the routers, as long as that time to live time has not expired, then it can give information that has been cached throughout the internet. So it makes things a little faster. With the launching a website, I thought we should get some, like when you think of launching, like launching a big rocket or something like that. So we're going to get just a couple pictures for launching rockets, I guess. So the first part of getting this information ready to launch is we have to gather those people who have the information. So in this case, I actually ran a WHOIS record for midcamp.org. That information is, let's see, so there are numerous companies called registrars that basically lease you the ability to own a domain name. Or not own, maybe a lease. I'd say lease or rent kind of thing. So you don't say I own it for the rest of time. You just say I own it for this year, or this 5 or 10 years. And so you could go to one of these companies and say, I want to buy midcamp.org. And somebody at MidCamp has done that. And so this is the actual information of who bought it, and what and how to actually access it. So we'll look through this information to get some of that information, some of the information what we need to actually launch the website. And in this case, actually, there is some useful information, but it's also a little bit of a dead end for us too that we might need to work around. But we'll get to that in a minute. So the registrar in this case is actually a company called DreamHost.com, which also does hosting, it looks like, and so, but that's really the company that basically says, hey, somebody came to us and said, hey, I want to buy midcamp.org, and so that's the company who ultimately, controls that domain currently. And there's also some information about when it was last updated or created, as well as when it expires later this year. On this next page here, these are some more information from the WHOIS record. There is a bunch of information here. This is where I said it doesn't give us much information here because there are usually 3 contact informations: the registrant, the admin, and the tech person. And they usually include a name, an email address, phone number, and a full postal address of those different technology persons that are related to this domain. In this case, they all just say privacy protected. So that doesn't really give us much information. Assumingly, if you called this number or sent an email to this person, that information should hopefully, you should be able to get a message to the owner of this domain name. That may or may not happen. But hopefully, what we'll have to do, I think, is find some sort of other way to get a hold of this information. If we were going to say, hey, I want to, I've built a new MidCamp website and I want to launch it. This kind of doesn't give us much information. But the actually important information, though, is here at the bottom, which is the name server. The name servers are 2 different servers at cloudflare.com. So that means that most likely they use cloudflare.com for some part of their hosting. Actually, it probably also means that cloudflare.com is where they actually manage their DNS records. And that is a really useful piece of information in this case, because that's probably, basically that means that we know that somewhere someone has a Cloudflare account to manage midcamp.org, and we'll have to, if we were going to launch a website, have to find who that is and to make that happen. So this is where, yeah.
Well, really, the name server is where the DNS information for the domain is found.
Yeah, that is where it's currently being found, and you could change it. And this is where I think a lot of the complication can happen. Is you've got a number of different parties. You've got the place where it's registered, which in some cases also does DNS, and but then sometimes you don't use that, and you use another DNS service like Cloudflare, or even another third-party service.
But there's only one server where that information is. All the others are dependent on the home server, which is what that one is.
Right, yeah, and that is where the DNS records are currently stored and coming from. That's definitely true. Sometimes also clients want to change where that DNS is hosted. If the DNS is hosted with their old hosting provider that they don't really want to use anymore, then you might have to go through another process of actually getting the domain name information and putting it somewhere else.
But still, that information will be there because there's only one, what they call qualified domain server. Mm-hmm. There can only be one, and that would be so. That if that got moved, that would change as well to wherever it is hosted, wherever that name is.
Yes.
Where the qualified domain name is found.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The DNS records are those 2 Cloudflare DNS servers, and you can have up to 3 or 4 DNS servers at least, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so I think we're getting close to finding all the information we need basically to launch a website. We'll just go over those terms a little bit more. The registrar is the company who leases the rights to a domain name. The registrant or admin is an individual or company who actually bought that lease to use the domain name. And the name servers are actually the servers where DNS records are sent or are queried and received from. Or queried and gotten from, So we'll update here this kind of list of our stakeholders. The registrar is DreamHost. The owner at some point is, because the privacy is protected, we have to assume it's someone of the MidCamp organizers. So if I was going to launch a website, I'd have to kind of find out. Let's see. If we're not changing the name servers, we don't really need to find out who actually manages that domain registration. But we have to find who. What's that?
The owner is the only one who can change it.
Yeah, they're the only ones who could change the name servers anyway. But we have to. The difference is, I guess, we only really need to find the person who actually currently manages the DNS records, which may be the same person, maybe not. For some reason, sometimes it's the owner of the company manages the domain name, but they have the DNS servers pointed to an IT company that really manages all the DNS records for them. And so, yeah, so basically we're still looking for kind of a person who manages the DNS, and we'll have to talk about just picking out some hosting as well and how to get DNS records for that new hosting. So yeah, that brings us to the next step, is really to find out who currently manages the name servers. And at this point, it's sometimes a little hard to find that out, especially with the information we have. We're probably just going to have to, if we're going to do this, in this case, probably have to talk to some people that we know that manage MidCamp as an organization and say, hey, who actually runs the DNS and how can we change it? And hopefully someone knows that. And at MidCamp, I'm sure they do, because they're very, very technical people. Sometimes with clients who are, a manufacturing company or I don't know, a machine. Yeah, I don't know. Like some of our clients are organizations, nonprofits, and things are kind of like, I registered a website 5 years ago. I don't know how it works at all. So, you have a question, sir?
Yeah, I've had a lot of that, and you can go to any WHOIS server and find that out.
Yeah.
I like domaintools.com.
Yeah, well, that's what I was showing earlier. If I do a WHOIS on midcamp.org, all I really got was privacy protected and these name servers, and so it doesn't really give me much information. Hopefully, if I did send an email to that email address, maybe I'd find out who actually, if they respond, I'd find who actually manages it.
But you at least know that it's DreamHost.
Right.
Register an email with it's hidden, and you know where the name servers are.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, it still doesn't really help me get a login to that Cloudflare account where the DNS is supposedly managed. Until
you'd have to get that from the owner anyway.
Yeah, you'd have to get that from an owner of some sort.
You'd be acting as their agent anyway, so they should provide that information.
Yeah, no, I just have had many times where clients are just like, I don't know. Somebody set it up for me 5 years ago, and I don't know how to get to it. And then you might have to call up the company that set up a website for them 5 years ago and say, hey, do you know how to do this?
And they're out of business.
Yeah, that can happen too. So
you can eventually make contact with whoever's hiding the registration and identify yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not easy, but it can be done.
Yeah. Yeah, so then if there's another step here too. If you wanted to start actually hosting the DNS yourself, the process of changing name servers, I don't recommend doing that at the same time as launching a website, because the process of changing name servers seems to take like a day or two for the rest of the internet to really recognize that, I think. So, yeah, that might be something to do either before, a number of days before, or a number of days after the launch, I'd say, if you're going to set up that kind of thing. But basically, we want to get that login contact. So, for this case, we'll just pretend that we got it, or we'll just assume we got an email from somebody that says, here's either the login for Cloudflare's DNS, or a place within Cloudflare where I can manage the DNS, or here's the person I have to contact and say, here are the DNS records, change them at this time. So we're going to talk a little bit about hosting. These guys are, it wasn't a good picture that I found, but they're kind of looking at a bunch of server racks in a hosting environment. So it's from a silly TV show. This is a basic list of kind of Drupal hosting requirements. If you're looking at hosting Drupal 8 or Drupal 7, you need at least, Drupal 8 needs 5.5. Drupal 7 works on 5.3 or less. Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 core at least will work well on PHP 7, which is the latest version of PHP. Drupal 7 contrib modules, most of them I think will work well on PHP 7. A couple of them, smaller ones especially, may have some minor issues. Any sort of MySQL database is well supported with Drupal, but Drupal can also be used with lots of other different types of databases, thanks to PHP's PDO libraries and things. There are plenty of, I would recommend even if you're not doing a Drupal website, talking to the people who built the website and say, hey, what do you recommend for hosting? Because if it is a very kind of complicated website that has lots of data, it would be better to have a better, beefier server. If you're getting a lot of traffic too, you would probably want to have put more money into hosting as well. And that's kind of brings me to my next point about hosting. Hosting is a very a wide range of, it could be a couple of bucks a month to thousands of dollars a month to host a website, and it really depends on a lot of your needs. I would say, yeah, if you spend more money on hosting, you will get sometimes a better performing hosting system so that it will actually run your website faster. Or if you pay more money, you'll get better support. I've used some very cheap hosting companies where suddenly your server or site will go down, and you might not get rid of much of any information about why it went down and how to get it back up. It'll just kind of come up hours or days later, and they'll be like, "Oh, sorry." So that's where I don't know. Some cheap hosting, I don't recommend it because they won't give you much information about why it happened and what they're doing to make sure it will not happen again. And then, yeah, if you get more money, spend more money on hosting, you can also get like numerous servers with all the same data on it, and so then you can also handle a lot more traffic. So it's again, talk to the developers of the site, and talk to hosting experts as well to try to figure out what is the best way to host a website. And let's see. So yeah, in this example, I said we're going to do something like host it on Pantheon, which is a cloud hosting provider that we use a bit, and I found to be pretty nice. But so the nice thing is now we've basically got this whole list filled out. We know where the name servers are, and we're in this case going to kind of assume we know how to actually change these DNS records. And then so from the hosting, depending on your type of hosting, there is a little bit of what you need for DNS records as well. If you're using some sort of virtual private server or a private server at all, then basically you just get an SSH account into the server, and usually you can send any type of traffic to the IP address and it will respond. With cloud hosting like Pantheon, maybe you can't, it's hard to read from that little screenshot, but on that page you have to, if you say, hey, I want to actually get a website that responds to midcamp.org, you probably have to actually write midcamp.org into there and say add it to the list. So the cloud hosting service knows I'm supposed to respond when someone says, hey, I'm looking for a website at midcamp.org. And then also right after that, they will give you a list of here's the DNS records that you should use for this domain. And so usually you'll get something like either this A record. An A record is just here's an IP address where the server is, or a CNAME record is kind of a pointer to a more A records or more records somewhere else. The CNAME record says if you actually look up this DNS server, then you'll see some more records. And the nice thing is, too, then you can respond with more than one DNS record that says, I think actually on the midcamp.org website, it did give back 2 different IP addresses. And so then the DNS can kind of go to either one of them to get the information. Assumingly there's probably 2 different servers running the midcamp service site. We're going to talk a little bit about here while setting up hosting. We're going to talk about SSL, Secure Socket Layer is what I think that stands for. Although actually now it's been replaced with something called TLS, which is, we use them interchangeably. Basically, that means all the data between your website and the server that runs your website and the browser or device that you're using is encrypted. That's when you have an HTTPS or a lock in your browser, a lock icon in the top of your browser. And this, I think, is more and more recommended for almost every site. The reasons really are, it's just, honestly, if you don't have that and you're logging into your website if you're not logging in securely and you're logging in over even a public Wi-Fi thing, there could, like here at Drupal Camp actually, if you're on the public Wi-Fi where there's no password, anybody else that's on that public Wi-Fi could actually be, listening to your traffic and actually see your login information. And basically your password and your username is sent over that wireless connection to the wireless router in the clear. So someone could actually read your login. It's not likely that's going to happen, but it definitely could happen, especially in public places. So that's where, if you do have HTTPS, that whole thing is encrypted, so no one can actually read what is going on. And so, yeah, most hosts and DNS providers do offer some sort of SSL. So the same place you bought your domain name, you could probably buy an SSL. Otherwise, there's companies like Komodo, DigiCert. One that I recommend, I mentioned at the end of the slide, called let'sencrypt.com. If you're wanting to encrypt your personal blog or even your website for free, you can use that service too. You have to install some sort of a agent on your server if you have that kind of access. Actually, because MidCamp is using Cloudflare, I'll mention too that even a free Cloudflare account, you have to put the DNS on Cloudflare. But I think that will also, you basically run your site through their Cloudflare system, and it actually puts a certificate on there too. So that would be another option, as another way to get. If you check out cloudflare.com, I think you can get either their basic service for free, and that does include SSL. So yeah, a couple more things. If you are setting up your own server, or you manage a server, you can look at, there's a couple resources here. Cypherli.st is a website that offers kind of generic recommendations for setting up SSL on Apache, Nginx, IIS. Kind of gives you a list of here's exactly the encryption ciphers and other settings that are considered the most secure at the time. And related to that is this website SSL Labs. After you get your website up and running, or if you have a kind of a test URL that has SSL set up as well, you can actually run the SSL Labs checker on any website, and it will give you kind of a scoring, A, B, C, D, F kind of scoring for how well your encryption is set up, and how likely it is someone could actually break that encryption. So that's a lot of fun. Briefly, we're going to talk about search engine optimization, or SEO, as it relates to launching a new website. The biggest part of that is whenever you do a whenever you make a web request, blah, blah, blah. Whenever you make a request to a browser, it comes back with a response code. The most common ones are 200, basically is, yes, I know what you're talking about, and here's the information. 404 is another common one where it just says, I don't have a web page or a file or anything in that location, so I'm just going to give you this error code 404 that says nothing's here. One response code, in many of them, you'll sometimes see a 500 means there's some sort of server error. But 301 is one that says, this information is no longer in this location, and it's in this new location over here. So go over there, and this will be where the information is at this new location. Your browser actually just doesn't even tell you it's moving. It just automatically asks for the next thing right away. So you don't even really notice. The nice thing about 301, there's actually a couple different similar 302 type things where your browser will also just kind of redirect itself. But this one also tells it's a permanent type of redirect, which means the search engines are also going to look at that and say, oh, I should actually kind of update my index to not go, to not start, or to no longer keep this old page that doesn't exist anymore, and actually, update my information to point to this new location. So examples of that in a couple different areas. Maybe your old site was an ASP.NET site or something like that. So the old URL was about.asp. or maybe it was /info/about was the URL of the about page. On your new site, you've redesigned how the things are organized, and so the page is at about-us. And so what you'd basically do is create a redirect that says when someone tries to go to about.asp or info/about, the 301 response just says, actually, no, the new information is now at /about-us. And there are a number of ways to do this. Drupal does have a redirect module you can install where you can manage or create as many redirects as you want and manage them. The redirect module also has settings so that anytime you change the URL for any reason, that it will just create a new redirect from the old one to the new one. And that might work in most cases. But also you could write in the server configuration in Apache, Nginx, IIS, any of those types. You could actually write, if you want to be more fancy, kind of regular expressions or just a bunch of string matching to say, hey, redirect from one place to another. One note I would recommend is to, like, sometimes internet marketing folks, SEO people, like to redirect everything. I would just say if the content doesn't exist on the new site, don't redirect it to some other random page. If you had I think our company website 10 years ago had something about, making like a QuickTime VR tour of your business or house or something. And that's not something we really do anymore. So if someone goes to that page now, they get a 404 message, and we're not going to redirect them to the blog page or the page that says we do internet marketing, because it's probably not the same thing they're looking for. So then let's see. The other part of that is redirecting domains. So domains, usually there's a bunch of domains that you have for a website, and that's pretty easy, so that if I actually did try this, if I go to chicagodrupalcamp.org, it'll redirect me to midcamp.org. And if I go to midcamp.com, it'll also redirect me to midcamp.org. And so that's what we want to do is, even for this case, actually, if you go to midcamp.org, it also redirects you, I think, to www.midcamp.org. Or if you go to 2017.midcamp.org, it redirects you to www.midcamp.org. And what we just want to have happen is, on some websites, you could actually have it set up so that any of those would be considered, any of those would give you back the website. But if that happens, then Google or other search engines could say, oh, I've actually got 4 different websites here. I've got midcamp.org, www.midcamp.org, and 2017.midcamp.org, and maybe they all have slightly different information according to Google. But in this case, we know that they're all the same website, so whenever someone goes to 2017.midcamp.org, the server just redirects them to www.midcamp.org. Just make sure everybody's on the same domain, because then the search engines aren't going to get confused. If at some point chicagodrupalcamp.org was the main domain, and then you decide, oh, we don't want to keep this registration around, it just costs us another $20 every year, and then you turn it off, then people aren't like, oh, the website's gone, because they've been notified that midcamp.org is the place to be, not chicagodrupal.org. So yeah, it helps make the search engines a little happier, because it doesn't think, oh, we've got 4 different websites here that might have the same content or not. They know it's not a duplicate because they're all being directed to the same place. Okay, so that's a couple things about preparing, but now we're going to go to the final preparations for our launch. Okay, well, first of all, I do recommend, especially if you're building or developing the website, and set it up on the hosting. Try to make sure you can test it on the new hosting environment. There's a couple different ways to do that. Services like Pantheon and those will give you a URL that you can say, here's the live website. It's not the domain name you're going to use, but it's pretty close. It maybe basically is the live website. The other thing you can do is your host file in your computer. It's in different places depending on which operating system you use, but the host file will allow you to basically bypass all that DNS record request stuff. So you can just say, midcamp.org is at this IP address now, and your computer will not even ask the DNS servers where it is because it already has it listed in its host file. And so then you can actually test the website out, make sure that it is working on the new hosting system. If you have a test URL like that isn't actually midcamp.org, you can actually look at the two websites side by side and say, hey, is the old website and the new website functioning the same, especially if you're moving the same website from one hosting environment to another. And if you don't, then you're going to have to look at figuring out why it's not working right. But then the last thing I'd recommend, and this is really an important part of making it a smooth transition, is to change the DNS records to have that TTL, the time to live, as short as possible as you can. 600 seconds is 10 minutes. And we'll talk about why to do that in a second. Yeah, basically, when you make the final change, if that time to live, that TTL is very long, like a day or two, when you make the change, it'll take a day or two to actually register that change everywhere across the internet. But if you a day or two before change it to 600 seconds, 10 minutes, or you could even do 5 minutes or something, or even an hour. Some DNS hosting that isn't as good will sometimes say an hour is the minimum. But for that time, you could see both websites. And this brings us to kind of, the final switch of DNS. And so if you have control of the DNS, you just log in and say, hey, I'm changing these DNS records to point to this new IP address, this new server we've set up. And then, again, for that time that the TTL, time to live record is valid, both websites could be used on the internet. So this can be an issue if you have like contact forms or ordering systems that are used on both websites. I would maybe recommend the old website, you actually kind of shut it down temporarily, put a little message that says, hey, we're fixing something here. And so then you're not actually getting information submitted to both websites at the same time. You could potentially, if all you really have is just basic information on the website, but if you're collecting information on both websites at the same time and you want to have that information in the future, it can be kind of hard to, after the fact, kind of merge them back together. And so I don't want to do that, but you could if you want. Let's see. So now the site is live, and then we'll do a couple last things after the launch. Especially sometimes when I've launched a website, it's not until after we actually, when we launch it, we actually kind of turn off the old website, and sometimes not until after we completely turn off the old website do we realize, our new website was actually just using images that were on the old server or other resources that were on the old server. And you don't actually see that until the end. Hopefully you can get back a copy of that server or access that information somehow and get it moved over to the new server. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but it could. Services like whatsmydns.net will basically allow you to query DNS servers all over the world. If you really want to see, is our DNS actually changed? It shouldn't be much of a surprise, but it will kind of, it basically will give you that information. DNS is usually pretty responsible. Every once in a while, I guess, I know Google's had some things every once in a while where some DNS server in Pakistan does something weird and then it screws up the internet for a while or something. I don't know. But you don't hear about it much. Again, I mentioned that SSLLabs.com, if you set up a SSL certificate, maybe not until actually it's live do you get really reliable information on how well it's set up. So maybe run that as well. And then, and then also verify that those redirects that we set up are actually redirecting correctly. I don't know why that one's separate, but I would also say after you've even when you do make the big change, keep that TTL information very low, because if you do have to, for some reason, if the new server just doesn't work at all, or you have another major issue, you can easily change the DNS records back to the old records pretty quickly in that 5 or 10 minutes or whatever. But after you're done, the reason the DNS TTL is often pretty high is because then, again, it doesn't take as long for people to get to the DNS server to get the information, and also it means less people are actually asking your DNS server directly. They're actually getting the cached information from around the internet. So after you're done, make that TTL information really high, because then it's more easy to get the DNS quickly. And then basically, we're done. That's basically all I have. So I guess if anybody has any questions, we've still got a couple minutes. Ryan.
Do you have a checklist that you follow, like when you're going through this process, to make sure you don't forget any crucial steps? Anything you could share that way? Or do you just remember it or Google it ahead of time?
I don't know. It's I guess over the years we've had a bunch of different checklists that, there are a lot more things, like when you're launching a Drupal site, you want to also turn on various caching things and this and that. And so we've had probably a couple different checklists. I'm thinking of maybe putting this into like a blog post as well too. So I think we could probably, maybe a checklist is a good idea. So maybe I'll try to do that. I don't know. Any more questions? I don't have a checklist in my pocket, so it's a good idea though. I will put up here too. If you want to give some feedback on my talk, you can go to Joined In, and they recommended too that I mentioned that you come to the sprints tomorrow. If you have never contributed to Drupal, it's a good opportunity to start doing so. I know Carrie was talking about accessibility earlier, and I might try to help with some Drupal accessibility stuff tomorrow, maybe at the sprint. So we'll see. But any more questions? All right. Well, thanks for coming.